All right, hello everyone, and welcome to part 4 or 5 of our Data as a Feature webinar series. The title for today's webinar is Your Data in Your App, Implementing Interactive Reports and Data Visualizations in a React App. So if you've been tuning into the series, the series is all about walking you through and explaining how this demo application that embeds reports and visualizations inside of it was built. And in some of the previous webinars, we've talked about how the setup for the application was done. In part 3, we walked through how the reports and visualizations inside of the app were actually developed. And in this webinar, to no surprise, we're going to be talking about the integration and the embedding of those reports and visualizations we walked through in webinar 3 were actually embedded into this React application. And if I've mentioned this on the previous webinars, but if you haven't had a chance to experience this demo application, we highly encourage you to check it out. It's on jaspersoft.com. And essentially what you'll get is a guided walkthrough of the application itself, the user workflow, the various components and features of the demo app, and you also get a sneak peek into how various components of the application were built. So it's just a really good reference as we go through this content to understand exactly what we're talking about in a little more detail. And again, you can find that through jaspersoft.com. And another thing that I've mentioned on previous webinars is we had a number of individuals that were a part of this project team. And you're going to be hearing from the two big heads there at the top today. Sherman Wood, who is on the TIBCO Jaspersoft side, has a lot of experience in various roles at Jaspersoft, and he will be able to share a number of best practices, broadly speaking, about embedding and as it relates to this demo app. And Chad Lumley, who you're probably also familiar with if you've been tuning into the demos, this demo webinar series. And Chad was the senior UI developer for this demo app. It has a lot of experience with React and led all of the front-end integration of the reports and visualizations into this app. And so we'll get into a nice deep dive in terms of how that was done today. And let's take a quick look at the agenda and give you a slightly more detailed understanding of what to expect. The first thing we're going to cover is actually independent of the demo app altogether. We're just going to give you an overview. There are a number of options you have when you want to do embedding, and we'll just explain what those are and in what circumstances you might want to choose one over the other. The second thing that we'll do is introduce you to embedding with visualize.js. And visualize.js is an award-winning JavaScript API that Jaspersoft offers that really facilitates in particular this seamless form of embedding for reports and visualizations. And so we'll just introduce you to a little bit in terms of what that is and how it works and how you can interface with it for this project and how you can use it for your own projects as well. And then the meat of today's session is going to be a walkthrough of how various pieces of content in the demo app were embedded. And we'll take you through the application, and we'll show you behind the scenes some of the application code that was used for the embedding process and give you really a close understanding of how this was done from a technical standpoint. And Chad's going to be leading that part. And then the last thing we're going to do is kind of sum up a lot of what was covered in today's session. What are the key things that you should walk away with? And we'll go through a few best practices that are related to the demo app and just related to embedding in general as you go about thinking about doing this for your own apps. So with that, I'm actually going to hand you over to Sherman Wood, who's going to take you through this first aspect of what are your embedding options.
Thank you, Shane. So let's just, we're talking a lot about embedded through this whole series, just recap a few things about what Jaspersoft thinks about, embedded data visualizations in apps, what that actually means. So the whole point of embedded data visualizations is you are designing an experience to present to people using your application who are consumers. They're there to get the right information that they need to do what they need to do in the application, right? So they don't want to search for it, they just want to experience the information that's inside and the workflows that are inside the app. So you've got your job as a developer then is to work out how to deliver that. So what sort of things fall underneath the realm of data visualization inside your application. So there is, of course, the visualizations and dashboards. You've got widgets on the screen that are interactive, they're all nicely visual. You're usually summarizing data and so on to present that right information to your consumers. And sometimes there's sort of multi-element sort of dashboardy style where you're clicking around or allowing them to click around to drill down to other things or navigate to other parts of the environment to go from like master to detail, for example. We usually find that people just need a straight report. They need to be able to take that information away from the application. So you need to allow people to basically do that inside your app, either in a interactive in-app sort of way, or maybe distributed, like they're receiving a downloadable PDF or receiving things via email or something like that. One of the things we often find is people need data into their app, right? So that is often produced nowadays by microservices. And you can actually use Jaspersoft to generate microservice data that is useful inside the application in a variety of ways. We'll go into that in a little bit of detail soon. And then lastly, the thing that really your consumers are often looking for is self-service. If you lock them down into a particular experience, you'll end up they'll end up being pretty frustrated, and you as the application owner will be on this endless treadmill of creating the next visualization, next interaction. So if you can give them some way to allow them to create their own visualizations inside the application that they can take away for themselves or save away for later and maybe share with their work group or something like that, that is actually going to help their satisfaction with the environment, as well as your productivity in terms of delivering the visualizations and so forth. So that's the sort of the what side of things of embedded. Like these are the sort of, this is what data visualization from our sort of perspective means inside applications. So there are different sorts of embedding options that you see in Jaspersoft and across basically the industry, right? A lot of original older apps, older visualization technologies, like your business objects and so on, did not have an ability to embed. So if you wanted to have reports and visualizations, you had to go somewhere else outside of your application. So that's sort of pretty much old school nowadays. The next sort of step around things is being able to just deliver data or visualizations as really static or static interactive methods. So like your app just says, give me this data or give me this visualization, and it comes up, and is often used for like mass reporting and so on inside the app. So you can do some things there. Jaspersoft can do this where you can generate a visualization, have it sit on the page, but it is not tends not to be interactive on that because it's just a snapshot of something, right? That's very useful for that data, just if you just want data to feed into your app, but not terribly useful for visualizations. Jaspersoft and other platforms can embed like full screens inside the app. Jaspersoft has some ways to skin the screens to provide that seamless, as seamless as possible, an experience there. Pretty simple, but you lose a lot of control. So really, we tend to look at it as more of a, you're really trying to take over the main screen for a complicated workflow rather than do more dashboard style things. And the thing that we've now gone into over the years, and you'll see, people do this with their own JavaScript frameworks and so on, is they use a JavaScript framework to embed, to create and embed the visualizations. So it's, you have complete control over that user experience. Now, what Jaspersoft does with its visualize.js library, it It allows you to create the visualizations and deal with all the data access in an external service, and then use the JavaScript library to integrate it deeply into your page. And so you get some product, you're not having to handwrite all the JavaScript for the visualization. You're relying on the Jaspersoft engine to generate the visualization and the machinery to embed seamlessly right inside the page. This is basically a productivity improvement, as well as you can get into a lot of things like security and so forth within that. Okay, so let us go and have a look at some of this in action. We're going to have a look at the bike share application, and I'm going to walk you through a few, how some of the visualizations are actually done, and is a bit of a recap, but I think it's important at this particular stage so you can actually see what's going on. So the bike share application is a fictitious thing. So we came across it. We came up with a scenario to say we're going to provide a bike share management application for people who have got like a bike share franchise, which could have multiple regions in an area. So you've got bikes and you've got drivers and you've got racks like stations and all that sort of thing. And you're either a manager who wants to see what's going on in their world, and then you've got a driver who actually is doing things like moving bikes around and repairing them and that sort of thing. So we provided different user experiences for these two personas. So let's go into the manager and quickly have a look at some, so Jaspersoft has been embedded into bike share in a number of ways, the ways that I've already talked about. Is embedded, it's not separate. So let's go just in as the manager straight off. So one of the first things that happened here is when we did a single sign-on between the bike share app and Jaspersoft. So anything now running in Jaspersoft is in the context of this logged in user, this manager up here, all right? So what we're seeing is a few different things all at once. So apart from that single sign-on, which sets up a lot of things around security and establishes a context for all the interaction, we did some things like this dialogue up here to filter out which region I wanted to focus on, which time frame, and so on. The data for that came out of Jaspersoft. So we set up, there was actually a call done through the visualize.js library to actually get the input controls for, or actually the input control data behind this. Makes it really easy. You've got all that data access capability in Jaspersoft, and you can just consume it. So if we go and look at San Francisco last week now. So we drilled down and we immediately came to this other map. Now this map is a sort of a combination of some things. So we used a JavaScript mapping framework from TIBCO called TIBCO Geoanalytics to actually do the map. But the data for this came from another REST call. And the actual, what was actually happening behind the scenes is that Jaspersoft was generating a formatted JSON object that then the map actually consumed, right? Then down here, we've got some other things going on, like this is actually one visualization with the KPI, key performance indicators here. This is another one, and this is a third. And these are all separate visualizations coming from Jaspersoft, all rendered sort of in parallel here. And on top of that, we've got some interactivity. So when we do a drill down, we're running a different visualization to appear within that, right? So you can build up this rich sort of dashboard style of things right within the environment here. So we've seen data coming up in a couple of different ways. We've seen complete visualizations here as well. So the last little bit, so those are all being done through essentially the visualize.js library, calling Jaspersoft, as well as we had one REST call that was also going into Jaspersoft for the data behind the map. So the last sort of interactive style that we've got is this is actually, again, showing some data out of Jaspersoft. We are browsing the set of visualizations that this particular user has got access to, right? A set of reports and so on, which they can go and play. They can go and create a dashboard here. They can create a report on the fly right in the thing. Chad may show a bit of that later, but just quickly, this is actually coming out of Jaspersoft again through a visualize.js call. And so when I come in, I say I want to show the selected thing, right? So this was all again, this is actually what we call an ad hoc view in Jaspersoft, and it's nicely. We're going to how many things driven here. This is actually capable of being created right inside the app. So let's go and modify this guy, right? So the style of thing beforehand, the ad hoc view, we're using visualize.js to use visualize an ad hoc view in Jaspersoft. This is actually a full Jaspersoft screen that has been themed and embedded in the page through an iframe. Sort of the last sort of style of thing within that. And this has got all nice interactive things like, okay, we want to, I don't know, we can want to zoom in on this. We can, let me get that out of the way. We can export what we're seeing as different output types. We can save the changes away back into Jaspersoft so that they're later. We can come along and see the information as a table or a crosstab, for example, within that, all nicely, all within the environment. So that's the sort of, I want to give you that sense of the, how things hang together and the different styles of embedding that you can get into with Jaspersoft. All right. So I'm going to stop my sharing. And I'm going to leave it to Chad now.
All right, thanks, Sherman. All right, so for mine, we're gonna dig into the code a little bit. But let's talk about the agenda first. So first, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna do like a recap, just a brief recap of what it's on webinar 2, what we talked about. And then today I'm gonna talk a little bit about digging deeper into Visualize.js. And then we're gonna walk through some embedding, just the actual code in the actual application. I'll show you actually how it's embedded. So first, let's do a quick recap of what we talked about in webinar 2. Basically, I talked about the Project 202 design process for the project. We went from beginning to end, talking from the design to the actual implementation. We talked about how we do research-based design and data-driven design to actually drive these design decisions, and how we identified personas for the app to actually design the users. And then we talked about the visual design a little bit, about brand creation, the backstory, creating comps and stuff like that. And then I kind of talked a little bit about the development of the bike share app from a front-end perspective. So kind of overview of the state of modern web development, kind of a modern workflow and the different frameworks that are available to use. Then we talked about why we used React, why we chose it in the first place. And then went over some best practices, some helpful libraries and some patterns that I use that all developers use from day to day. And then we talked briefly about the Visualize.js and kind of an overview of how it works. But today we're going to actually dig into Visualize just a little bit deeper. And I'm just going to kind of, it's going to be an overview and then we're going to dig into it. So basically it's just recap, it's a JavaScript API for interacting with the Jasper report service in the backend. So what we do is we use it to actually embed visualizations into our application. It's actually initialized, so it's a self-initializing library. So it'll initialize and then it'll just live in our application in the global scope. It'll just live out there so we can access it from wherever we want. And what's cool about that is since we're using a React app, we've got a single page web application. So we don't have to keep reloading it every time. It's just always there hanging out. And that's really nice that we can have access to that. And also, the Visualize.js has a very robust API. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of customization you can do. But I'll just talk about kind of the basic stuff we did for the demo. Just the basic functionality we did, which is just the login, log out, of course. We did some, which is the report API, which actually, for these pixel perfect visualizations that you have in your app, it's how you embed those in the page. There's an ad hoc view API, which is basically embedding those reports you created with the ad hoc editor, actually in the Jasper reports, the self-service part of the application. And then about input controls. So the drop downs, radio buttons, other types of inputs that you can use to interact with these visualizations. And kind of a basic rundown of how Visualize works over in this diagram over on the right. So we've got our React application. We say we want to show a visualization on the page. We call this helper, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but that's just kind of a way for us to easily interact with the Visualize.js. And then once we do that, Visualize will go to the Jaspersoft services. It'll request a report, and it'll return that report to your DOM and actually render it on the page. Or you can actually go and grab data directly from that endpoint. So there's a couple different ways to grab data. So that's just a really quick way of how Visualize works. And then so next we'll get into, let's see here, going here, we're going to actually get into some code. So we're going to walk through a bit of the data. So let's talk about some code. So we want to interact with Visualize. So let's talk about how we do that. So let's go over to our code here, and let's show. So we're going to look in the UI folder in our code. If you check it out from the repo online, you can follow along. And we're going to look in the first. We're going to look in this public folder right here. And so this is where just kind of our globally available files are. As you can see, there's Visualize living in there. And we got a couple of versions because you can actually version it if you want to, backup versions. And we're actually hosting it locally. You can actually have it pulled down from the service itself and load every single time. We found this way is a little bit quicker, just happened the way we chose for this application. And then you actually load it in the application here. So this is going to be our entry point for our React app. And you're just going to include the script here. Like I mentioned before, it's a self-initializing application. So it'll actually just live out there in the global scope. Once you create it, it's initialized, there it is. So, okay, so that's great. It's living out there. How do we interface with that? Another quick point about if you're going to embed the Visualize library, you're also going to want to host the CSS files for all the reports locally. Just a little extra step, a little tip there. So we're going to close that down. We're actually going to go into the source over here. So we're going to look in the helpers folder. And so this is where the actual Visualize helper is that we created to help us easily interact with the Visualize JS library. And this is nice because it's a custom class that we have created. It lives by itself, so you can actually include it in your app. You can just grab it from our repo and use it in your own application to help you guys out. So just make things a little bit easier for you. But basically what we do is we reference that instance, that global instance I was talking about, and then now we have access to that API pretty easily. And so we've got a bunch of methods here that we use to interact. So we've got our login, which is pretty straightforward. This actually just kind of sets up all the authentication stuff like the tokens and all the initial configuration you need to make requests. And then every time you make a request, it uses this information. So it's pretty handy. And then we've got a log out, of course. And then this is kind of our first method here for grabbing a visualization. This is our get report. And kind of a note about this one, we'll just take a look, is that kind of another little helper we've added to this file is that we're actually wrapping all these results in promises. And promises just allow us to asynchronously load this data and also chain together these asynchronous results so we can control the order of things and also do other things while this report is being grabbed in the back end as visualization. So it's a pretty handy thing to do. We've done it all in here, so you're welcome to grab it. But basically, all the methods in here are pretty straightforward. You just pass in some parameters here. This is the actual API, and this V is where we're referencing that global reference we have up at the top. And then we're just passing in all these parameters that we've passed into here, and if it succeeds, then loads it on the page. Pretty straightforward. We've also got one for the ad hoc view here. Very similar, accessing that ad hoc view API, JavaScript API. And then we've got input controls, same thing here, grabbing that input control. And then this one's, I didn't mention this, but this allows you to grab a list of reports. So from a directory in your Jasper reports, service, it'll tell you what all the reports you have available in that particular directory, and you can grab them, grab a list, and it'll return the list of all those and kind of links to them. So that's pretty much it for the helper. So like I said, pretty straightforward. All we're doing is just kind of adding some extra help to help us interact with that Visualize.js. So let's look at some implementation now. So we're going to go into the component library here, or sorry, the pages library, and we're going to look at the dashboard, which is the first page here. First, I'm going to go back. Let me show you. I'm going to show you exactly where it is on the page. So we're going to log in as a manager here. Log in. Let's see here. Scroll down to the bottom here. So these are those reports that Sherman was talking about. And so these are actually embedded. These are pixel perfect reports using the report API that we've got in Visualize.js. And these are just, there's 3 reports on the page, and we want to load them on the page. Well, so how do we do that? It's surprisingly simple now that we've got our nice helper file in there. So I'm going to show you, let's see, let's go down here to where we actually get the reports. So these 2 methods here are really all you need to grab the reports on your page. There's a little bit of fanciness in here because we wanted to control the order in which things loaded on the page. But to give you a quick rundown, we just got this little method here because we want to load 3 reports, so we kind of broke this out and reused it. But basically, access our Visualize helper. We pass in the container ID, which is where you want it loaded on the page, the div, where the resource is on the Jasper report service, parameters, which are filters, different types of reports that are loaded, just different options you can actually pass into the API, which will give you different results. And then we just basically, that calls the helper sticks it on the page in this container that you have on the page. So pretty straightforward. We've got some fanciness up here because we want to grab all these reports at the same time and then pop them on the page at the same time. So we use this promise all method. It's just kind of a handy little tip to use if you want to wait till everything to load and then pop them on the page. The promise all, what it does is that when all these resolve, all those methods that we have, that's why we wrapped them in a promise. Whenever all those promises resolve, then it loads them on the page. So it's pretty straightforward. So that's just embedding just a basic report. Let's talk about ad hoc reports and input controls here. I'm going to go to the reports page here. This may look a little bit different than what Sherman showed you, but that just shows you how robust this is. I mean, we can pretty much do it with any type of. We can adjust it to anything we would like. But what we've got here is we've got an ad hoc report loading on the page. We've got a list of reports up here. So these are all the reports you have access to in that particular Jasper reports directory. And then here's all the filters you have access to based on what report you have shown here. So we can go in here and switch report. It'll load up here. All right, and so got this new report, got a new set of filters. We can go through here, select filters, bam, we've got a new report. So we've got a couple different interacting elements here on the page. So let's talk real quick about how we do that. So let's go over to the code here, and we'll go into the view report page here. And so let's talk about, let's see here. First, let's do get reports. So what we want to do is grab that list of all the reports, right, first. So we access our Visualize helper. We're going to grab a list of all those reports. Then we're going to modify that that data we get back, all that list of reports. We're going to modify that so it looks nice and pretty for a dropdown. And then we're going to basically pass that to the dropdown. It's going to show the data of all. It's going to have a list of all the different reports you have access to. And what we're going to do also as well is that we want to grab that first report on the list just so we can initialize it to an actual report. Then next, we're going to want to grab the list of filters that we have available for that report that we have selected. So good thing we did that one first. Now we can grab all the filters related to that report now by passing in that report. So we're going to go through, and this is an actual type input control. So we're going to grab a list of all the modifications you can make to the actual ad hoc report that's going to be shown on the page. And then we're going to modify that. We're just going to do a little cleaning. We're going to adjust it so it looks like a dropdown. Then we're going to set it. Now it's going to add it. Now it's going to add it to that dropdown. And then we're also going to initialize this one to like the first filter in there, just to make it easier. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. So now we've got the report, we've got the filter. Now we're going to show the report. So we've got basically we're going to ad hoc view. We're going to pass in all that. We've got all that we have from earlier, all those parameters, the actual report, the actual filters, and then we're going to grab that ad hoc view. We're going to show it on the page. And then we've got listeners that if you ever change those drop downs on the page, it'll rerun this show report with those new parameters and update that report to its new form. So all in all, pretty simple. It's really just kind of modifying the data to match our custom UI elements, but that's just adding a little bit more fancy stuff to it. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. One other thing I want to note, another thing of why we wrapped them in a promise. Like I said, things had to be loaded in order, but really asynchronously. So we're loading the reports first. We're going to wait for those to get done, and then we're going to load the filters. Once those are done, then we're going to show the report. So a nice easy way for us to actually control the order in which things are loaded on the page. All right, so that's the ad hoc. Another thing you can do to the ad hoc that Sherman mentioned is that you can actually modify this with the actual editor and use the self-service functionality of Jasper reports. So when if we go to the modify here, and if you saw from Sherman's, is that we actually can go in here and edit the edit this. You can look at the data. You can adjust all these different columns. I'm not going to get into too much detail. Sherman already went through that. But but what we want to do is, so how do we put this on the page? Super easy. It's another one of the actual embedding methods that Sherman mentioned, which is to use an iframe. So we'll go into ad hoc, which is where this lives. This is all the code. This is it. So we've got our iframe on the page. We've got the source is the main thing. And what we're doing is we're just passing in this URL, this source, where it's located at in the Jasper Reports service, and then also passing in a few other different parameters into the source so that Jasper Reports knows to return this embedded element inside of this iframe. So it's pretty cool. So just by doing that, you can fully edit a report. I mean, we are passing in, so whenever you click on a report, whatever you're editing, it'll pass that into here as a parameter and it'll grab the reports. That's really the most complicated part of this, but otherwise pretty straightforward. You just can see it. It's very nice. All right, so that's that. Let's talk about some other stuff too. Let's talk about interactive reports now. So what I'm going to do is go back here. I'm going to log out real quick. We're going to go over to the driver section. All right, so we're loading up the driver. Here it comes. There we go. All right, so on here we've got, these are reports. These are those pixel perfect reports that we grab with the port API, these two guys right here. What's cool about these is that I think Sherman showed early on the actual dashboard page, you can interact with those KPIs and adjust the reports that are shown on the page. Here we can actually, so we've got this station and we want to, that's on the map up here, and say we want to check in that we've actually driven there. Well, we can click this. So, I mean, what's actually happening there is that this is actually the report. This has nothing to do with my application. I'm clicking on that. It's calling a callback that I passed into that report. And then that is actually allowing us to interact with our application that we have. So there are two separate pieces here that are interacting with each other and pretty seamlessly too. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So we'll go over to the driver dashboard. And let's see, let's go down to the get reports. So this is the report for that check-in report, which is this guy over here, right there. And what we're doing is we're actually passing in this event here, a click event, and we're passing in a callback into it. And this callback calls this method that's in our application, which actually, so that the pop-up component actually has data that's that needs to be populated depending on what you click on. So whenever you click this, whenever you click on the element on the page, it's calling this callback that we've actually passed into that report. And then that is calling a method in our application. And then that's doing something. So you can have these, that's a lot of functionality. I mean, you can pass as many of these events as you want to into the app and map them to different places. So you can have interactive reports that are completely separate. I mean, that actually can like do stuff in your completely separate application. So very nice, very, very cool interactive functionality. And kind of the big guy we're going to take a look at here. Check out this map. So this map data in here. So this the way we're actually grabbing this map data is direct. So we're not using Visualize.js. We're actually using the Java Reports REST service as our backend here. So we're calling that REST service that has all the map data we need, because we don't really want to use Visualize.js for this, because this isn't a Visualize.js visualization. We just want the data. So we can actually use Jasper Reports as our back-end REST service, grab the data, and use it to populate this map here. So, I mean, I don't really have anything to show for this part, but I just wanted to mention it. But we did have, we created a service in the application. Well, I guess I could just show that real quick. So we've got this is our Jasper Reports service here. It's pretty straightforward. Let's see here. Here's the actual API calls. So we've got, this can actually call into to that Jasper Reports API. And directly, we get data, like Sherman was saying, in the JSON format, show it on the page, show the visualization. So, yeah, pretty nice way to interact with the backend, and get that custom data. So there's lots of options, as you can see. So, but yeah, so just kind of wrap it up. From what we showed in the code, you saw how easy it was to embed in the application. And using our Visualize helper, if you guys want some help, feel free to use that. That'll make your lives a lot easier. We did a lot of the heavy lifting and kind of added some extra bonus stuff to it that's definitely beneficial to your app. Visualize helper is standalone, yeah, so it's not tied into React. And also, yeah, so just feel free to check out that repo, look at our code, break it apart, use it in your own applications. Yeah, so that's it. And so I'll be handing it back to Shane now.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chad, for that walkthrough of embedding, and specifically embedding within the demo app. I know there's a lot involved there. And, obviously this is a recorded demo, so a recorded webinar. If you want to go back and, take any aspects of what Chad walked through a bit slower, you can do that. And as Chad also pointed out, all of the application code for this demo app has been published to a GitHub repo, which we'll point you to at the end of the webinar. But if this is really something you want to sink your teeth into, then just know that that's available to you as well. And for this final portion, we're actually going to take you through, kind of this process of summarizing what we covered today and what the most important things we believe are for you to walk away with. So I'm actually going to turn it quickly back over to Chad and Sherman to take you through the embedding best practices. So Chad, over to you.
Yeah, so just kind of some basic takeaways. I kind of mentioned it before, but it's really easy to embed this in your application using Visualize.js with just a few simple lines of code. You can actually do some really cool visualizations into your application. And also, too, another key takeaway, use this project as a guide for your application to get you started with these modern web applications using these embedded visualizations with Jaspersoft. Yeah.
So yeah, I was working with somebody who was doing something in Angular 8 the other day, and I basically picked up the Visualize helper and dropped it into the Angular Heroes, demo thing that they have, and basically we had Jaspersoft up and running with Visualize in 5 minutes. It was really that sort of easy, really quite fun. So I think this aim should really be for you as web developers. Aim for that seamless embedding experience. Make sure the look and feel is consistent. across everything, doesn't feel like you're somewhere else, basically. That's sort of a key to it. So you can use all these different techniques that we talked about today in a way that is an integrated approach for delivering that user experience. One sort of thing that we really didn't talk about so much, but it's actually a key part of Visualize and Jaspersoft, is every interaction that happened in and out of Jaspersoft was in the context of some logged in user. And there's a lot of security mechanisms built into the Jasper Report server that you can configure to say who can see and do what. And you can customize very heavily what data people are seeing based on the user profile. Even what visualizations that they have access to, like when they're browsing, here's my list of reports and dashboards. You can also do a lot of stuff there too. So, when you get down that track of doing this embedding, thinking about how to secure is a key part of the stability and usefulness of the platform.
Great, thank you guys. And yeah, so when you think about embedding and integration, there are two things you need to think about: authentication, which Sherman was just getting at, and then the user interface. And Visualize.js helps with both of those. And again, hopefully, what we went through today was a good introduction to those concepts. And also, as Sherman pointed out, we've been marketing this as a React app. And certainly some of the things that we've done here are unique to React, but a lot of the general approaches and the use of Visualize.js and embedding can be applied with other front-end libraries as well. So don't think that this workshop is very specific and unique to just React. This is, again, these concepts can be applied to other use cases as well. And we've done this in each of the webinars, but I want to give you a sense of what's available to you in terms of how you can learn more about the demo app. Obviously, we have this ongoing webinar series and we're getting close to the end. The final webinar is going to be a little bit more on how do you secure this experience, and we're going to dive a little bit more into the self-service bit and webinar 5 of this series to kind of round out a lot of the main concepts we want to communicate to you. So stay tuned for that. I mentioned at the beginning, we have this guided demo app that you can click through, and it's completely prompted and tells you a story and narrative on how the application was built. This is available through jaspersoft.com. There are a series of workshops and documentation that we are continuing to put together, and we're really excited to be able to release this soon. So keep an eye out for those, and we'll be making an announcement when they're published on Jaspersoft Community. And then, as we've mentioned a number of times, the source code and the data for the application have actually been made publicly available through this Jaspersoft Bike Share GitHub repo. So you can either do a Google search and find that immediately, and then it'll also be published. All of these resources would be published in one centralized spot on Jaspersoft Community as soon as we get those workshops up. So if you're interested in looking more, these are your options. And with that, I'll just say thank you, everyone, for your attention. Thanks again, Chad, as always, for contributing. And thank you to Sherman as well. And stay tuned for webinar 5. It'll be coming out within the next week or two. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.